Let's just start with basic strategic objectives. Um, let's look at the Russian strategic objectives first. Uh, First and foremost, Russia is seeking to um, get Europe and the United States to buy into the notion of a negotiated new European security framework. It's something that Russia put on the table prior to invading Ukraine. If people remember back to December 17th, I believe, of last year, Russia submitted two draft treaties, one to NATO, one to the United States, which articulated Russia's stance on what its vision of a new European security framework could look like. They invited the West to read it and have a serious discussion about it, and they were ignored. Um, then Russia invaded Ukraine, and Russia has two objectives. One is the demilitarization of Ukraine, the other is the denazification of Ukraine. Demilitarization means the elimination of all NATO influence on the Ukrainian military, and denazification means just that, getting rid of everything that Russia um, considers to be related to the ultra nationalistic ideology of Stepan Bandera and the white supremacist manifestations of that. Now, these are words that I'm not using. I mean, people go, well, Ritter, yeah, you're very good at Kremlin talking points. I'd advise people to go back and actually read the amendments put by the United States House of Representatives on Department of Defense appropriations legislation from 2015 up until just this year. Um, they continuously forbid funds, U.S. taxpayer funds, being used to train the Azov Battalion, which is listed by the U.S. Congress as a white supremacist neo-Nazi organization. So anybody who wants to pretend that there isn't a Nazi problem in Ukraine, simply I refer you to Congress and its own legislation. The Russians believe that this is a big problem, and they want it eradicated. Now, why did I bring this up? Because Russia hasn't shifted gears at all. I mean, Russia's still saying we want a European security framework out of this, and we are adhering to our original objectives. Russia hasn't altered course at all. Ukraine, on the other hand, is saying that victory can only be achieved when Russia is evicted from all territory, including Crimea. I would say that Russia is closer to achieving its objectives than Ukraine is to achieving its objectives, uh, which tells me Russia has the momentum, Russia has the initiative, and Russia has realistic objectives that can be attained. Um, Ukraine doesn't. I mean, there's just literally no one on this planet besides maybe, um, I don't even think the Ukrainians believe it, that they're going to recapture the Donbass, that they're going to recapture Kherson, Zaporizhia, that they're going to recapture Crimea. This is fantasy. So you have one side that their objectives are fantasy based. You have another side whose objectives are, while difficult to achieve, are very realistic. So I'll go with the realistic side over the fantasy side as to who I think is going to prevail. Then we take a look at capabilities. For certain, Ukraine had a good September. There's no one that's going to debate that issue whatsoever. But at what cost? And what I mean by that is, in order to achieve this good September, Ukraine had to absorb billions, tens of billions of dollars worth of NATO equipment. It took months to do this. It took months to get people trained on this, to bring the equipment in, to match the equipment with the people, organize it, and bring it to the battlefield. And then in 1 month, Ukraine pretty much burned through everything. The casualties they've suffered have been horrific. They've lost the equipment, they've lost most of the manpower, um, and they're down to a position now where they're begging the West to help them reconstitute this capability. Russia started September with pretty much the same force structure that it brought in when it invaded in February. And what had happened is Russia pretty much had insufficient resources to the task they had set forth for themselves. They had many parts of their defensive line that were stretched thin. And the Ukrainians were able to exploit this, and the Russians wisely, I believe, traded territory for lives. The Russians aren't in the business of just throwing away Russian lives. And so they weren't going to hold on to a strong point and defend it to the last man. They were more than happy to withdraw, trade territory, save lives, consolidate their defensive positions, all the while inflicting what should have been prohibitive casualties on the Ukrainians, tens of thousands of losses. Meanwhile, while Russia is consolidating their lines, they're reinforcing. Vladimir Putin ordered the partial mobilization. 300,000 reservists have been called up. 87,000 of them are currently deployed into the Special Military Operations Zone. The rest are finalizing their organization into fresh combat units, which will give the Russians tremendous flexibility and operational capacity.
Demilitarization refers to the elimination of all NATO influence on Ukraine's military, while democratification is about getting rid of ultra-nationalistic ideologies and white supremacist manifestations. Now, some might say that I'm parroting Kremlin talking points, but the truth is, even the United States House of Representatives has recognized the issue with the Azov Battalion, a white supremacist neo-Nazi organization, in their own legislation. So, where does this leave us? Russia's objectives, while difficult, are realistic. On the other hand, Ukraine's goals of evicting Russia from all of its territory, including Crimea, are closer to fantasy. In this situation, Russia has the momentum, the initiative, and the attainable goals. Let's take a look at the capabilities of both sides. Ukraine had a good September thanks to tens of billions of dollars worth of NATO equipment, but they burned through it all, suffered heavy casualties, and lost most of their manpower. Now they're begging the West to help them reconstitute their capability. Meanwhile, Russia started September with the same force structure as when they invaded in February. They traded territory for lives, consolidated their defensive positions, and inflicted significant casualties on the Ukrainians. They've even called up 300,000 reservists, with 87,000 already deployed. As Ukraine's combat capability shrinks, Russia's increases. The West, it seems, made a mistake in misinterpreting Russia's soft approach to the conflict, as they have now taken the gloves off and shown that they can close down Ukraine as a modern nation-state anytime they want to. So, what does this all mean? We have a situation where one side has realistic objectives and the means to achieve them, while the other side clings to fantasy. This is a stark reminder that sometimes the world isn't black and white, and that we must take a step back and look at the broader picture. In closing, the situation in Ukraine is far more complex than it appears on the surface. While it's easy to vilify one side and support the other, we must remember to stay informed and look at the situation objectively. The consequences of this conflict extend beyond Ukraine's borders, and its resolution will have far-reaching implications for the global political landscape. As we continue to analyze the situation in Ukraine, it's important to consider the role of external forces, like NATO and the United States, in shaping the outcome of this conflict. The Western powers have been actively supporting Ukraine, providing them with much-needed equipment and training. However, this assistance may not be enough to tip the scales in Ukraine's favor, especially considering Russia's overwhelming firepower and clear objectives. We must also examine the long-term consequences of this conflict on the international stage. Ukraine's struggle for sovereignty has reignited tensions between Russia and the West, tensions that had been simmering since the end of the Cold War. With both sides increasing their military presence in the region, there is a growing risk of escalation and a potential return to a new Cold War-like standoff. In this high-stakes game of international diplomacy, one wrong move could set off a chain reaction that could have devastating consequences for everyone involved. This is a sobering reminder of the delicate balance that must be maintained to prevent a full-scale conflict from breaking out, which could have far-reaching implications, not only for Europe but also for the entire world. At this point, it's critical for leaders on both sides of the conflict to approach the situation with a level head and a commitment to diplomacy. The key to a peaceful resolution lies in finding common ground and seeking a mutually beneficial outcome for all parties involved. So, what can be done to resolve this crisis? First and foremost, there must be a renewed commitment to diplomacy and dialogue. Both Russia and Ukraine need to engage in meaningful negotiations to reach a peaceful settlement that addresses the concerns of both sides. The international community, particularly the United States and NATO, must act as mediators and facilitators in this process. Second, there must be a focus on rebuilding trust and fostering cooperation between Russia and the West. This may seem like a tall order given the current state of affairs, but it's essential for ensuring long-term stability in the region. The world has come a long way since the days of the Cold War, and no one wants to see a return to the tense, high-stakes standoffs of the past. Lastly, the international community must work together to address the root causes of the conflict, including the rise of ultranationalism and white supremacist ideologies. This will require a coordinated effort to combat extremism, promote tolerance, and encourage democratic values both within and outside of Ukraine. The situation in Ukraine is a complex and multifaceted issue that cannot be resolved through force alone. Diplomacy, dialogue, and cooperation must be at the forefront of any efforts to bring about a peaceful resolution to this conflict. As citizens of the world, we must remain informed, engaged, and committed to fostering a more just, peaceful, and stable global community. Click the video on screen to stay updated and fight the Free People's Movement. Click this video now to stay updated.